Prosecutors will still pursue hate crime charges against the Club Q shooting suspect. We're learning more about the suspect's prior threats to be a mass shooter, leads to questions about accountability for law enforcement. We sit down with the man in charge of making sure that Indigenous communities get answers when someone goes missing or is murdered.
The Native community is always overlooked in many occasions.
Their mistake flooded I-70. It could have been disastrous. In the end, it'll be a $45,000 fine. And it's the sound of solidarity. Ukrainian Christmas carols ringing out in Colorado. Next. The Club Q shooting suspect now faces more than 300 counts, including murder and hate crime charges, which are still being pursued even after the defense team announced that the suspect is non-binary. Certainly, one member of the LGBTQ community could act out of hate for others, but there are plenty of questions about whether prosecutors would stick with those hate crimes charges. So these charges for the 5 people killed, the 17 people wounded. And police say that there were another 5 people injured that night, people who were not shot. El Paso County District Attorney Michael Allen would not get into the specifics following today's hearing on charges, but he says his office feels confident they have the evidence to back up those hate crime charges.
I think there are plenty of things that are obvious that have been covered in the media already, and I'm going to stop the answer at that point. Because I do want to make sure that we protect our ability to prosecute this case going forward. We obviously think we have enough evidence to go forward on those charges, and I'm going to leave it at that.
Preliminary hearing is scheduled for February. Until then, the suspect's being held without bond in El Paso County. The Associated Press is reporting details today from sealed law enforcement documents that say the Club Q shooting suspect had threatened a mass shooting in the past, right before an armed standoff with officers. The AP confirmed details first reported by KKTV in the Springs that last June, the suspect's grandparents said the suspect had threatened to kill them and was stockpiling weapons and ammo, talking about becoming the next mass killer. The AP says the suspect then got into a standoff with police at their mother's house, leading to an evacuation of the neighborhood. There's video from that incident. The suspect was never convicted of a crime, and the case was sealed. It is not fair to expect law enforcement to be perfect or to predict the future. It is fair to expect law enforcement to use the tools at their disposal to keep people from getting predictably massacred. With 5 lives lost and dozens more forever changed, Coloradans deserve clear answers and accountability. The Associated Press reports law enforcement knew the Club Q shooting suspect had told family he would become the next mass killer as he stockpiled guns, body armor, a homemade bomb. Law enforcement also knew he was willing to move from talk to action, because AP reports those records show the suspect got into a standoff 2 years ago, dressed in tactical gear, threatening to kill officers. The suspect who promised to be the next mass killer walked out of custody, walked back into possession of guns, walked into Club Q and started shooting. If his prosecution was botched, then dismissed, we need to know. If law enforcement refused to use the state's red flag law to seize an unstable person's weapons, we need to know. These records are sealed, and journalists are fighting to unseal them. Because law enforcement cannot be expected to be clairvoyant, but it should be competent, and it must be accountable. The Colorado Healing Fund now says it has put together underwriting support that will allow all of the donations raised to go to those impacted by the Club Q shooting. The nonprofit has raised almost $2 million, including, I should say, $120,000 from a Next Word of Thanks microgiving campaign. Some Club Q survivors objected to the fact that the nonprofit was taking a portion of the donations for its overhead costs, its operating costs. The Colorado Healing Fund announced today that anonymous donors will cover those overhead expenses, allowing all of the funding to go to those impacted, and that the nonprofit hopes to operate on that model going forward when it activates for future mass tragedies. The city of Denver setting up a place for 100 migrants to stay tonight after that group was unexpectedly bussed into the city overnight. The city says it's not clear who sent them here. An emergency management spokeswoman told me that most or all of the people sent here are adults, and they're trying to figure out how this quote-unquote somewhat organized effort originated. The Republican governors of Florida and Texas have bragged about sending migrants from their states to areas where Democrats are in control. The governor's office in Texas told us it's not them that did this. Haven't heard anything yet from Florida. NBC News reported in May that the Biden administration was preparing to move migrants from overwhelmed border areas to the interior, but that plan directly called for cooperation from local leaders in the cities receiving migrants. I reached out to the Department of Homeland Security tonight, have not heard back. Colorado has a new point man for missing persons and murder cases that involve tribal communities. And he already has his first case. Our Luis de Leon sat down today with the man who's going to be the go-between for law enforcement and Indigenous families.
A bare office may be a representation of how often Aaron Julian is not there.
For my son.
He's constantly on the road, carrying representation on him.
This is something traditional that a lot of Native Americans wear, and they recognize it immediately.
That recognition is vital to his role.
When they do see me arrive, I'm not wearing a traditional tie.
A member of the Hickory Apache tribe, he's a few weeks in as the director of the Office of Liaison for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Relatives. In that time, he's already met with local law enforcement and tribal police departments, as well as worked an active case. He describes those first visits as a sense of relief.
Not only did I feel it, it was expressed to me by the tribal council and their members that were there in the community. It was like everybody took a deep breath.
His position was created as part of a bill passed this year in the last legislative session. It's something Julian feels is needed beyond Colorado.
The Native community is always overlooked in many, many occasions, just like the disparity in what kind of numbers of missing, murdered Indigenous relatives are across the United States. It's very inconsistent.
The Colorado Bureau of Investigation says there are 12 active cases of missing Indigenous people in the state. Julian believes the environment between Native American communities and law enforcement have played a role in these cases going unsolved.
Generally, there's a lot of animosity normally between the community and law enforcement, and being from a small community myself, I understand that dynamic of it becomes us against them.
Jurisdictional issues, he says, is another factor.
They have tribal laws, they have their own law, they have their own police department, then they have state law, and then they have federal jurisdiction.
And as someone who brings that understanding and representation to these investigations, he hopes to fill a missing link.
Recognizing that real quickly from both sides is to channel all that information into one focal point.
So by the end of the month, CBI plans to have a notification system up and running specifically for cases involving missing Indigenous people, as well as a dashboard with information on active cases that's also being created. Advocates, by the way, believe the number there is much higher than what's reported by the state. Kyle, once approved, Julian will also be leading trainings on how to better work with Native American communities at police academies across the state.
So he already has his first active case. What do you tell you about that?
Specifically, that was a case out of Ignacio, Colorado. A missing Indigenous woman tragically was found dead. A suspect had been arrested, but he says that this really opened his eyes to how receptive some of the families were. He was able to respond directly, bring in some more resources. It's that progress, that connection that he hopes to make between both sides to help get some of these cases solved.
Luis de Leon, thank you. The I-70 construction flood could have killed someone. The contractor responsible is going to get a $45,000 slap on the wrist. Along with learning about the fine, our Steve Staker found out more about what went wrong that day last summer.
This is what a $45,000 mistake looks like. Back on August 7th, when a storm rolled through Denver, floodwaters swallowed the new underground portion of I-70. At the time, the contractor that was building the new Central 70 project told us an error prevented the pumps from turning on automatically. We do not know if they were not running at all or if something caused them to stop, the company wrote in an email to CDOT at the time. Now we know. As part of the contract with CDOT, Kiewit, the contractor, had to issue a report on what happened. That report says pump levels were set incorrectly, something that changed after they were originally installed and tested. And the backup system was disabled, something else that was installed and tested, then changed during construction. They go on to talk about how much they'll do to make sure this doesn't happen again. CDOT told us today they believe the lessons have been learned. After all, Kiewit is losing $45,000 because of it. $45,000 of the $331 million total for this construction project. That's 0.013% of the total cost. Got a statement from Kiewit. They say that they determined it was actually a computer setting that was set wrong on one of the systems that alerts the pump to start working. They say that since then, they've been able to fix that computer problem. They've had several other rainstorms down there. We haven't had crazy news stories about it flooding.
Yep.
So the computers, the Control-Alt-Delete worked. Everything's working properly now.
We can all sympathize with computer problems, but if our computer could potentially get somebody killed, you want redundancies.
Absolutely. And, you know, they have a backup system, though the backup system wasn't set up right. Now they've tested that as well since then. That should be able to be a backstop if the first computer fails, that will kick in now.
Could have been so much worse. Hope we never see it again. Thank you, Steve.
Capitol Hill police officers get medals for their heroism on January 6th, a move that a Colorado representative tried to block. And a holiday tradition that transcends cultural divides, Ukrainian Christmas carols in Colorado. Next.
The law enforcement officers who defended the U.S. Capitol from insurrectionists on January 6 were honored as heroes today. They received Congressional Gold Medals. And there was a striking snub for Republican leaders from the parents of an officer who died. The mother of fallen officer Brian Sicknick accepted the medal on his behalf. She shook hands with Democratic Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and then refused to shake hands with Republican minority leaders Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy. Sicknick says she didn't want to shake their hands because they continued to back former President Donald Trump following the insurrection. Both McConnell and McCarthy voted in support of giving those officers medals. Colorado's Lauren Boebert was one of only 21 House Republicans and the only person in Colorado's delegation to oppose giving those officers congressional medals for their heroism. She called it an effort to score cheap political points. Next week, Colorado's Air Quality Control Commission is going to meet and talk about ways to reduce ozone pollution on the Front Range. The EPA is requiring that Colorado come up with this plan. Some climate advocates want them to consider a solution that would impact all of us at home, changing the way we do yard work. The Colorado Public Interest Research Group, COPERG, says shifting from gas-powered lawn equipment to battery-powered gear could account for nearly a fifth of the cuts that Colorado is supposed to make in emissions. So we're talking about things like lawnmowers and leaf blowers.
You know, on our cars and trucks, we have catalytic converters, but no such controls on our lawn equipment. So this equipment is so polluting that the amount of ozone pollution attributed to lawn and garden equipment in our region is more than 1/3 of all the ozone pollution coming from the tailpipes of all the vehicles on the roads in the Front Range.
Last year, Democratic State Senator Chris Hanson proposed banning the sale of gas-powered lawn equipment along the Front Range. That went nowhere at the state capitol. Climate advocates hope that the Air Quality Control Commission might consider some kind of phase-out of gas-powered equipment sales. Hanson, by the way, is one of 23 candidates running for Denver mayor. At this point, it's just easier to interview the people who are not running, especially when they are equally passionate about this city. Take Gabriel Landeskog. I understand he works as a professional athlete. He's 30 years old, so he just qualified to run for mayor based on age, but he's a Swedish citizen. You have to be an American citizen to run for Denver mayor, even if you love the city as much as Mr. Landeskog.
As much as I love these guys behind me, this is for you, Denver. We love you guys.
Even without the shirt, he looks very comfortable behind the official seal and podium, but Landy's not eligible. So he's one of several people not running for Denver mayor, as announced here. If you are not running for Denver mayor, but you're passionate about the city, maybe you have a good idea of what the next mayor should be talking about, email next@9news.com.
Well, we're still monitoring a couple of different situations across the state. Denver, the Front Range, Eastern Plains, we've been seeing mild, dry, sunny weather while we continue to monitor the snow in the high country and western slope. So right now we're at 45 degrees. It feels like 40 out there with winds coming in from the west-northwest at around 10 miles per hour. But our HD Doppler radar continuing to monitor those snow showers in the high country and portions of the western slope there. That's going to continue to fill out toward the south before it lifts back up north late tomorrow and just really fills over the majority of the high country and western slope. So in the meantime, we do have several winter weather advisories for central and southern portions of the high country and western slope. The central portions in tonight at midnight, but then we do have those other areas to the south that don't end until early Thursday morning. Overall, we're expecting maybe around up to an inch or up to a foot of more snowfall with those winds gusting anywhere between 35 to 50 miles per hour. Those higher elevations could see those higher totals. Now, in addition to that, we have several avalanche warnings that are in effect all across the state in the high country. They end at different times from the north to the south, and that's the way that the system is pushing through as well. So we're going to continue to watch for dangerous avalanche conditions in backcountry areas. In the meantime, we continue to see seasonal temperatures, dry, mild weather through the rest of the week here in Denver. Those temperatures in the upper to middle 40s, and it's not until next week where a new front pushes those temperatures down into the 30s, and that's where we're going to watch for our next possible snow chances here in Denver.
It's a show of support and song.
But one of the things that we can do as musicians is that we can remind people of the wonderful culture and heritage that is Ukraine.
A chorus from Colorado lets Ukrainian traditions take center stage this year. That's next.
Far away from most of our holiday time worries, the people of Ukraine deal with something real. They prepare for a winter at war, Christmas under attack. Here in Colorado, there's a chorus offering a simple message. They're not forgotten.
When the invasion happened, I think it left a lot of people feeling very helpless. That we actually have a ground war again in Europe is just really unfathomable. The concert is a collection of all different pieces from the Renaissance period all the way through pieces written last year. But what's really special about it is that we've programmed 3 different Ukrainian carols to really highlight the culture of Ukraine so that we remember here in our community the struggle that they're going through right now. My name is David Dunbar, and I'm the director of the Rocky Mountain Chamber Singers. There's a wonderful organization in the northern Colorado area. It's Ukrainians of Colorado, and I contacted them and luckily was able to find a wonderful woman who was able to help me, and she sat down with me and we went through every single word on those carols, and I had to write it out phonetically and then give that to my choir, and that's what we've used to actually sing all of these carols in Ukrainian. 2 of them are completely new to American ears, but one of them, of course, is very familiar. It's what we know now as Carol of the Bells. But one of the things that we can do as musicians is that we can remind people of the wonderful culture and heritage that is Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. And so I really wanted to do that by highlighting these 3 carols that we're singing on our concerts. For me, it's just been heartwarming. It's just another way for us to make sure that we keep Ukraine and her people in our minds during this time, and that we don't waver, that we stand with them through thick and thin all the way to the end.
If you want to hear those Ukrainian carols in person, the Rocky Mountain Chamber Singers have another performance this Friday in Fort Collins. We have your feedback about accountability for us and for others next. You sent stacks of feedback tonight. Nancy, thank you so much for sharing information about the Colorado Healing Fund. You could just let it go, and you didn't. A nonprofit that is raising money for victims and taking some overhead expenses is better than nothing at all. But a nonprofit that's able to get those expenses covered by somebody else so all of the funds can go to those impacted, that's even better. A note from Gail. Thank you for your statement tonight demanding accountability for law enforcement in the case of the Club Q shooting. We want to know what failed. Cindy writes in about the I-70 flood and the fine for Kiewit. Sounds to me like the contractor's blaming computers. Let's remember, computers are programmed by humans. It was human error, Cindy says. Hey, speaking of one of our favorite humans, a texter asks, where's Marshall? Haven't seen him in a while. Marshall is taking the remainder of his paternity leave with his newborn daughter and his wife. He is very, very happy to be gone. We'll see you next time.